Today on the 50 Shades of Pain show, we're talking about grief, and it's not about your loved ones. Welcome to the 50 Shades of Pain show. I'm Dr. Danish Mazumdus. I'm the medical director of Wellward Medical here in Lexington, Kentucky. This is our 50 Shades of Pain show where we talk about different issues, whether it's physical or emotional pain, to help empower patients so that they have a better understanding of how they can better navigate the healthcare system. I'm here with one of my favorite people. She is a very talented writer and a professor at Center College in the Department of French language. Is that correct?
Yes, French and Arabic.
French and Arabic.
Yes.
This is Dr. Allison Conley. And Allison, what are we talking about today?
Well, we're going to be talking about grief. I've mentioned to you several times in the last months, at this stage in the pandemic, I mean, we're going into year 3, believe it or not. I've seen a lot of articles about grief and then the way people experience grief. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk to you about that, know more about your experiences and maybe what kind of insight you might have for me and for other people who are watching the show.
Yeah, and what's interesting is my interest in psychology has always been there. I mean, I was telling you earlier that when I entered medical school, I thought I'd be a psychiatrist, but then I fell in love with the physiology of the body, and that took me towards anesthesia. But my interest in psychiatry and psychology was always there, and so pain management was a really natural fit because chronic pain is not just physical ailment, it's also an echo that's created in the body where your body is damaged, your nervous system is on fire, and your brain is interpreting all these signals, the most important of which is this filtration system in the middle part of your brain where it can filter out the noise. That's why sometimes we hear about people who, in the heat of battle, they didn't even know they're shot. It's because they have this capacity in the brain to filter out pain. But that same filtration system is reliant on the chemicals that maintain mood, like what we call our happy soup chemicals.
Okay.
Serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. These are chemicals in the brain that maintain and sustain our mood. So the tie-in between physical pain and emotional pain is actually exactly the same.
So, you know, the last few years, we've had lives that are much more isolated than they used to be. A lot of us have spent more time alone. We've been more separate from other people. Could that bring on grief? You staying safe or trying to stay safe like that?
Well, I think the first question is, what do we mean by grief?
Right.
So grief is any kind of emotional loss. Now we associate it typically with the loss of a loved one because it's most pronounced, it's most evident in those situations. But that I would call, you know, psychologists have a term, small t trauma versus big T trauma. And I think that grief is the same way. You've got big G grief and small g grief. It's just gradations of a set of experiences people endure. So the loss of anything that's valuable or cherished, I would consider as something of grief.
Okay.
And then, I'm sorry, your question.
Yeah, so, I mean, I can think about myself and I can even think about my students. I think of some of these small things, or they feel small, that we've had to give up, like a whole sports season, or the chance to study abroad, or family vacation. I heard a term disenfranchised grief, and I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, you sent me this article. It was a really good, it was New York Times, right?
Yeah.
Talking about disenfranchised grief, or grief that really doesn't get the opportunity to really be discussed or processed. And it reminds me of times when I was a medical resident, and in the middle of the night you'd be called to a code on the floor, and you get there and it's a patient who you can clearly see is like somebody's grandmother, somebody immediately you get in there and you're already connected or attached to this patient. And despite heroic efforts, you lose the patient.
Yeah.
And in the moment when you're processing, like, what do we do? How can we save this person? How do we recover from this? Everybody is as cool as a cucumber. I mean, it's like clockwork. Everybody's firing off decisions and actions. And then afterwards, there's this kind of lull where you come to terms with the loss. But you come to terms with it on a physical plane. Like we all kind of we all agree that there's nothing more that can be done. And we can feel good about our efforts, that we really made an effort to try to save this person. But what doesn't often get discussed is the aftermath, the emotional consequence of that. And to me, that's a really strong example of disenfranchised grief, because in those situations, there is a loss. We all feel it, albeit, we weren't connected directly to that person, but it was a direct tie of our efforts to try to preserve the life, and we know the connections that this person has in their life. Yeah. So medicine is great about many things, about saving lives, but often when it comes to the soft, the gentleness, the human touch of it, we're missing some things. And I think that right now, in the midst of this pandemic, even as we see hope, and I remember even as we saw hope last year when the vaccines were coming out, there was this kind of like pent-up angst and sorrow over all the things that have been lost in that time frame. And now that we're kind of recognizing the elongation of this pandemic, I think that there's people are on the cusp of recognizing the losses, but not quite yet being able to embrace it.
And what about an accumulation of these small G griefs? The small G's. Is there anything to be said about that?
I absolutely think there is. We all have a capacity for enduring hardship, and that comes from what hardships we've experienced and we've grown from. It comes from how grief and how loss has been modeled to us. It comes from cultural context. It comes from where we are ourselves in our own lives. Like I always say that we have three pillars that we stand on. There's your individual partner, there's your career or your purpose, and then there's friends and family. I think religion and spirituality plays a role in that as well, but these are really kind of the tangible pillars of anyone's life. We can all stand on two legs, but when it starts to get one leg, or if all three are really struggling, then your capacity for enduring hardship or enduring grief starts to be compromised. And in those situations, those little accumulations of small griefs, like something like, I just had a bad day, I got a speeding ticket, I was late for an important meeting, I said something and it hurt somebody's feeling, or I got my foot stuck in my mouth. Like all of those things are little G griefs or little traumas that start to accumulate, and particularly when things aren't going your way in any of those three pillar capacities, people can be struggling far more than they show on their face.
So moving into the holiday season, with probably most of us have a collection of grief that we've gathered over the last few years. Is it just important to be aware as we are getting together with our families, and what do you think about that?
Yeah, a lot of this perspective comes from having done the ketamine infusions, where ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic. It creates a barrier between your thinking brain, that feeling part of your brain, and the rest of your body, or the peripheral nervous system. And in that space, there's a lot of insights that I've seen and a lot of commonalities I've seen among different people. Okay. And I'm sorry, I went in this direction. I've totally forgot your question.
So is awareness important? Is
Yes.
it enough?
Yes.
Okay.
So one of the things that I think is really key is that emotions are like children. And if you try to quell an emotion without really acknowledging it, it's the same thing as if a toddler is yelling and screaming and having a tantrum, and you're trying to instruct the child on what to do or how to behave. It just doesn't work that way until you're able to acknowledge what that child is feeling, comfort the feelings, and then there's a moment of instruction and mentorship and guidance that you can provide. But until our feelings are brought to the surface, labeled, affirmed, or acknowledged, I say that a feeling is not real until it's shared. And it's because those feelings will resonate and reverberate throughout our mind without really finding a fruition or finding a solid structure that you can now do something with.
Yeah.
The moment that we are able to label a feeling and we can share it with somebody we care about, who we feel safe to be vulnerable with, that now becomes something you can do something with, and it just dissipates the intensity or the weight of that feeling very quickly.
Okay. So be gentle with ourselves,
Yes.
acknowledge what we've lost, big and small, but then we do need to speak it in a safe way.
Yeah, I might actually reorder that
Okay.
and say, reflect on what it is you've lost.
Yeah.
Identify or label the feeling that you're associating with that loss, and share that feeling with somebody else. Like, Allison, this past year I wanted to travel and I had to put it on hold. And while it doesn't seem like a big deal, it's put more weight on my shoulders, and I've had a greater sense of burnout because I haven't been able to care for myself in the way I normally do.
Right.
I'm feeling a sense of loss. I'm feeling a sense of burnout.
Yeah.
Now that I've been able to label that, I mean, I've been doing okay. But just simply saying that out loud, I'm thinking, well, maybe I actually do have a little bit of loss or burnout from not being able to take care of myself in the same manner I've usually.
And some grief.
And some
Yeah.
grief. And honestly, it feels lighter just sharing that with all of you and you, Allison.
Great.
So,
This has been helpful. Thank you.
well, I'm glad. And please, please, please use this community as a resource. I think there are a lot of people on our Facebook page, our Instagram, even our LinkedIn profile who feel the same way, who would support you in your expression of what you're feeling and what you're experiencing as part of your grief. Don't let it fester inside of you. So I encourage you to please write us on any one of our platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, even YouTube. You can message us on our website, wellwardmed.com. And if you ever have any questions about anything that we do here at the clinic, please feel free to ask. Dr. Donish,
I'm Dr. Connolly.
we'll see you soon. Thank you.